Okay. Number 3 is what really counts, though, and that's what we're going to spend a lot of time this term. The best way to deal with this problem is to find situations or design situations where the omitted variables are not correlated with W. How can we do that? The simplest way to do that is through some sort of experimental design. And what I want you guys to have in mind, and this is what we're going to start with in the deworming case, and it's just a good mental model to have in mind, is really a medical trial. So in a medical trial, the treatment group and the control group are chosen randomly by lottery. The treatment group and the control group, you have equal odds of being in those two groups, regardless of who you are. Your characteristics don't affect how you fare in this lottery to get treatment. Doesn't matter what your X is. Shouldn't matter what your X is if it's a proper lottery. So now we've kind of, if we can do something like a medical trial, we can break the link between your X's, your characteristics, and your infection rate. If the treatment works, some people get infection knocked down to 0, other people don't, and that difference is uncorrelated with your X's. That's the way forward. That's really the approach that medical trial researchers used. Really, the two groups that use a lot of the experimental method, medical trials, agricultural trials, actually, even 100 years ago, were using these kinds of experimental methods with treatment and control groups. And of course, in the real sciences, they experiment all the time. So we're just, we're lagging behind a little bit. But now in economics, people use these kinds of tools. Okay, so how will this help us? If there's random assignment, there's no correlation here between W and X, and this term goes away. Even for variables where D is very large, even for characteristics that really do affect the outcome, this term goes away. Okay, let me pause and see if people are kind of following along. What questions do people have? Maybe I'll push forward a little more. Okay. Oh, clicker question, perfect. Let's get into the details of this study in Kenya, but start with the following. Which age group in the data from sub-Saharan Africa tends to have the greatest worm infection burden? And here, just think about how worm infections are spread. That may help you a little bit in figuring out who's most prone to infection. All right. Okay, so most of you got the right answer. It's basically school-age kids. Some put younger kids. I think the kind of reason why one might think it's the youngest kids is you would think the youngest kids have the worst hygiene and sanitation. That's definitely true of my kids, who are very young. It's unbelievable. So that makes it really natural to think that they would have the worst worm infection rates. It turns out that's part of the story, but it's more than that. Part of the reason why school-age kids have the most infections, they also roam more widely than the youngest kids. So the youngest kids, if you look at their patterns of movement, they stay in their home, their parents' compound, or maybe go nearby. So they definitely have some exposure to worm infection, often sort of self-infecting. You can self-infect with your own fecal, worms in your own fecal matter. But the older kids who go much more widely, who are playing in a broader area, are actually both spreading the disease a lot and contracting it from various sources. So for instance, with schistosomiasis, I didn't go through the details too much. I think I mentioned last time that schistosomiasis was waterborne, and it was there's an intermediate host that's a snail for schisto. So you really get it by playing in infected fresh water. That's how you get it. The 2-year-old and 3-year-old aren't going fishing and bathing and sort of playing around in the local lake or stream, but the 8-year-old are. So they're just coming into contact with sources of infection that the youngest kids don't have contact with. So when you look at these, and then beyond that, as I mentioned, since the youngest kids, the school-age kids get infected a lot, but they also sort of travel more widely, they're a major source of the spread of these infections. So for that reason, for a long time, for like 20 years, the World Health Organization has really focused in on treating school-age kids as the key to reducing the prevalence of these infections in African populations and also some South Asian populations where there's a lot of infection. So let's move on to the project at hand. And the program we're going to study is Primary School Deworming Project in Kenya. And worms are a really big deal in this area. So I showed you that map with worm infection rates. This part of Kenya has really high infection rates. When we did the baseline surveys in these schools, over 90% of the kids had at least one worm infection. So really high infections. And as I mentioned, you can classify infections by severity, and there's different thresholds you could use. But roughly speaking, about a third of the kids had pretty serious infections. Like they had pretty high worm loads with at least one worm. And a bunch of other kids may have had moderate worm loads with each individual worm, but they had 3 or 4 different types of worm infections. So a lot of the kids were just really sick in this area. So it's a major problem to deal with. And this is just going back to, again, the rationale for treating kids. You can see for both, for hookworm it's a little bit flatter, but for both roundworm and whipworm, roundworm, ascaris, and trichuris, these are basically peaking at around age 8 or 10, school-age kids, and then kind of going back down. Hookworm has a little bit of a flatter profile. But clearly school-age kids are very important, and that's the sort of density of eggs per gram of feces, and that's just so nasty. Okay, how was this project evaluated? Well, this project was designed up front as a randomized evaluation. The goal was to try to use a tool like a medical trial to understand the impacts of this treatment. There were 75 schools in the area with these high rates of worm infections that were chosen for the sample. We were working with a local non-governmental organization, an NGO. So they were working in a particular part of Western Kenya. They did some initial surveys, and they talked with local public health officials, and we focused on an area of this district right on Lake Victoria, basically bordering Lake Victoria, where you not only have a lot of the geohelminths, but you also have a lot of schistosomiasis. And that's because fresh water is really the medium for the transmission of schisto. So the 75 schools were divided by different geographic zones, like stratifying the schools, and then ordered by population. So we created this list of 75 schools. And part of the reason we did it with this very simple rule of sort of stacking the schools into different geographic zones is this was one of the first experiments of its kind done in development economics. It was one of the first done in East Africa. The local officials didn't know exactly what we were doing. They were used to medical trials, but not these kinds of school-level interventions at the level of the school. So we wanted it to be just really transparent. We could show them the list, explain the rationale for why the schools were ordered in a certain way, and then to divide them into 3 different treatment groups, basically we counted off. So the list went from 1 to 75, and we counted off 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. The first school was group 1, the next school was group 2, the third school was group 3, again, all the way down this list. So there were these 25 triplets of schools. Group 1 had deworming introduced into those schools first. Group 2 got them the next year. Group 3 got them later. The NGO we were working with at the time was actually very small. They only had a small school health program at the time, and they had a kind of medium-sized textbook program. They didn't have all the funding to roll out some huge program. They were going to expand gradually the way they had done in the past. And we told them, okay, you're expanding gradually. Instead of expanding gradually in a way that we can't study, expand gradually in a way we can study. Go to the group 1 schools first, then group 2, then group 3. That creates treatment and control groups so that we can compare the early treatment schools to the late treatment schools, and it's something like a medical trial. We can get at the treatment effect. And because the schools were basically just stacked in this arbitrary order and then randomized using this list randomization, there's no reason the group 1s or 2s or 3s should be any different than anybody else. It's arbitrary how they were divided into different groups. Now, in subsequent field experiments and evaluations that we've done and that others have done, we typically now use computer random number generators. That's just become the standard, and for very good reason. That's truly random. But a list randomization approach like this has actually been used in a number of studies, and as I'll show you later, it produces three groups, groups 1, 2, and 3, that look really, really similar on everything we can measure. They look like they were very comparable at baseline, these three groups. Okay, so this is how it worked. For the 2 years of data that are in the original paper, and then we've done all kinds of follow-up studies in this area, in 1998, group 1 got phased into deworming treatment. The next year, group 1 and 2 got deworming treatment. And it turned out that the comparison group was delayed until 2001, in part because of some logistical issues and financing issues with the NGO. But in 2001 and 2002, all three groups got deworming, and then this particular study ended. And several years later, as I'll talk about, there was a national program in Kenya. Now, what did treatment consist of here? Treatment consisted of a couple different things. Treatment consisted, first of all, of those two drugs I listed before, albendazole and praziquantel. So kids in the treatment schools, where 90-something% of kids were infected, got these pills. The question we're often asked is, were the kids tested first to see if they had worms before they got the drugs? They weren't tested first. The standard approach endorsed by the WHO and experts at the World Bank is to mass treat kids in schools where you have very widespread infection. So if you think about it, if 93% of the kids are infected, and the drugs have minimal side effects, especially if you're uninfected, they're not going to do much to you at all if you're uninfected, then there's very low risk to mass treatment. So that's what's considered by far the most cost-effective way to go. And that's the approach that was followed here. Each school has about 300 to 400 kids. There's around 30,000 kids in total in the sample. So it was a moderate-sized study. It wasn't a tiny study with 100 people. It wasn't nationwide. It was sort of somewhere in between, with tens of thousands of kids tracked over several years. Okay, let me pause and see if there's questions on. Oh, let me say one more thing. In addition to the drugs, the treatment also consisted of health education. So public health nurses and NGO staff who've been trained made multiple visits to each of the treatment schools to teach them about good hygiene and sanitation, to teach them to avoid Lake Victoria when they could, because Lake Victoria is full of schistosomiasis, to teach them to wear, ask them, please, wear flip-flops, sandals, shoes when you can. A lot of kids don't like to wear shoes. It's warm in this part of Kenya. But if you don't wear shoes, you can step on infected fecal matter. That's actually how hookworm usually gets into the body. People, when they're running, don't realize there's infected fecal matter. They step on it, and the worm eggs get attached to the soles of their feet and then bore through the soles of their feet into their body. So nasty. And then the third thing was to really emphasize hand washing. So those were the three really key dimensions: hand washing, wearing shoes, and trying to limit exposure to infected fresh water. And if you do those things, you avoid infection with the major worm. So that's what treatment was in the treatment schools. Okay, let me see if there's any questions on the design. Yeah. In infection. Yeah, so I think the idea is as kids get older, their hygiene and sanitation, their sort of hygiene improves, or their use of sanitation. So, the youngest kids often won't use a latrine. It's very interesting. Different parts of the world are very different in their sanitation coverage. Many parts of East Africa, even though they're pretty poor, have very good latrine coverage. So something like 82% of households in our data, even 15 years ago, had access to a latrine. That's much higher than most rates you see in rural India, for instance. So there was pretty good latrine access, but a lot of the youngest kids don't use a latrine, they don't wash their hands, etc. But when they get to be 8, 10, 12, they do. They use the latrine regularly, they wash their hands regularly, and that's why adolescents and adults have lower infection rates. But for the youngest kids, again, including my own kids, they're not as into hygiene as we are when we get older. It's a little harder, something you're teaching them. So, yeah. Yeah, part of it, so there's a couple of reasons, I think. One of them is this notion that with these other worms, with roundworm and whipworm, it's really ingestion of the eggs. So it can be very localized, and this hygiene issue becomes really critical. With hookworm, that's certainly part of it. But part of it with hookworm is what I said, a lot of people get it by kind of stepping on ground that has infected fecal matter. So if you're going, sort of traveling longer distances, walking longer distances without shoes, you're going to kind of come into more contact with it. So I think that's part of it, where even having good hygiene, if you're not wearing shoes, even having good hygiene may not protect you against the hookworm infection, as well as those other worms. And then with schistose, really contact with infected fresh water. And on average in our sample, right by Lake Victoria, kids on average are playing in Lake Victoria multiple times per week. They're going to bathe, they're going to play, they're going to fish, they're going to swim. They have this huge lake right near them. Of course they're going to go play in it. But that's a huge source of the schisto infection. Was there a hand up? Did you hand up? No? Was there a hand up? Yeah. 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 Stacked alphabetically by geographic zones. They were divided into geographic zones, and the different zones had different names. And then they were ordered by basically school population within the zone. So there's something like 8 zones or 9 zones. So there's like 7 or 8 schools in each of those zones. Yes, if it were, so the idea is, let's say this first zone, let me just get better chalk. Maybe this doesn't work out well. Let me try to do it here so you guys can have a record of it. Okay, so this is school number 1, 2, 3. This is just a listing and the way they were stacked, right? Let's say the first zone had 5 schools. So this is sort of zone 1, school 1, zone 1, school 2, zone 1, school 3, zone 1, school 4, zone 1, school 5, right? And then the next zone starts, right? So this now is zone 2, school 1. I'm just going to make up numbers. Let's imagine this zone only has 4 schools. Zone 2, school 3, zone 2, school 4, and now we're in zone 3, school 1. The way we did the count for the different worm groups was, this is group 1, this is group 2, this is group 3, group 1, group 2, group 3, group 1, group 2, group 3, group 1, etc. So, the sort of ordering within zone, if we get to be groups 1, 2, and 3, is determined by this weird stacking, which is like, this just happens to be the border between, different zones. So now we restart, the first school in the zone becomes group 3. The first school listed in zone 1 was group 1, and so on. So, strictly speaking, you want a random number generator to get a proper randomization. This is what people call list randomization. And the fear with something like this is that for some reason, let's say with a small sample, let's say in that first zone, for whatever reason, the first school we list, the one that had the lowest population, because we ordered by population, was just really weird in some way. Well, now we have a case where we have, group 1 having this really, really weird school that sort of biases things. Like, group 1 is just going to look different. Again, I'll show you some of these, but in the paper we have just dozens of schooling characteristics, asset ownership, socioeconomic characteristics. On all those dimensions, the 3 groups look really similar. So we see this as a quite good randomization, but like a proper randomization in the technical sense of the term is a computer random number generator randomization. Again, at the time, we didn't want it to look like magic in the hat. The idea was we were dealing with local government officials, we were trying to explain what we were doing. Even the NGO we were working with was new to this, and we wanted to be able to show this is how we did it. Like, we did it in this kind of like arbitrary way. We listed them alphabetically and by population. Like, there's no, there's nothing different about these schools. There's in this area, in one of the 2 divisions that we worked in, there was actually one very powerful political figure. And our concern And the concern with a lot of people who work in this area is if for whatever reason, projects went to his area or didn't go to his area, the area near his home, the school and the clinics near his home, that maybe that would become a political issue. And Kenya in 1997, 1998 was not nearly as democratic as it is now. So we wanted to sort of insulate ourselves against that and have this totally transparent way forward. If we use the random number generator, sure, we could show them our Stata code, but it might be just a little bit less convincing than this. Now, once our partners in the NGO we work with were more comfortable with randomizations, then after that we've always done computer random number generators. So, yeah. There are, and there's been a big push in the last 4 or 5 years by the Gates Foundation to fund studies exactly like that about the impact of sanitation on various health outcomes and other outcomes. So there's sort of a growing literature on that. The numbers that I've seen, and this is something that even back at this point it looked like was the case, is latrine infrastructure is relatively expensive compared to a pill that's $1 a year or 40 cents a year or even less. And so what you need, if you're really going to build tons of latrines, is a lot of capital up front. It could cost hundreds of dollars to build a latrine. That could deworm a whole school, right? That's for one latrine. Now, so that's one concern, is it's more expensive. The other concern in this case, like a lot of the work the Gates Foundation has been funding has been in South Asia, because again, I mentioned before, in rural India, latrine coverage is a lot lower than in East Africa. But even here, some of the really key populations, these kids, have latrines at home and don't use them. Then it's actually an even harder problem. You have to sort of change behavior. It's not enough to say, oh, we'll build it and then everybody will use it. It's like, in this part of East Africa, the latrines were already there. You couldn't, with 81, 82% coverage, it wasn't a case of lack of sanitation infrastructure. It was a question of changing behavior. And then that is still poorly understood. I mean, there's been a lot of efforts to change health behavior. Some work, some don't. That could potentially be quite expensive. Even in our own case, we tried to cost out the pills, the deworming drugs, and cost out the health education. Now, the health education we costed out through the salaries of these public health technicians. They were about equal cost. So health education is not cheap. I mean, it takes one-on-one time, or it takes time with a technician to talk to a lot of kids and communities and get them to change their norms around hygiene and sanitation. That could be a multi-year intensive process if you want to do it well. So I think there's no doubt that for like a quick win, deworming drugs are really effective. They're really cheap. They're really easy to deliver. That's what the WHO recommends. In the long run, we'd love to have the sanitation in place, change hygiene, so you don't need to have the drugs forever. And I think that's everybody's goal. I think the Gates Foundation's been pushing for that, but that's more of a medium to long run endeavor. So that was really the rationale. So let me just show you the map of this area. These are the two divisions they were called. Now the sort of nomenclature of Kenyan local government has shifted multiple times since then. But the two divisions were called Funyula and Budalangi. And the location of the group 1, 2, and 3 schools are there in the circles. You can see that this list randomization produced this sort of scattering of group 1, 2, and 3 schools around this area. This is Lake Victoria over here. So you can see both of the divisions sort of border on Lake Victoria, especially Budalangi. Some of these schools are actually not in the lake. They're just in this very marshy area. So to reach, this is Runyu, is the name of this school. To reach that school, you have to walk across these sort of bridges that have been built over swamp to get to this sort of patch of land where the school is. There's also a school in Uganda. At the time we took the original GPS readings, that was a period where GPS readings were jittered. They weren't as accurate as they are now. We have the current readings. I should just read you the map. But anyhow, so this is where the schools are. And it's 5 o'clock. I think that is the right time to end. And I will see you guys on Tuesday.